And I think multipotentialites in corporate or multi-passionate people have the ability to change corporate's framework. They have the ability to add from an innovation perspective. And because you're coming in with so many skill sets from so many angles, when you're given a problem to solve, you're thinking of it from a social justice perspective. You're thinking from it from an analytical aspect. You're thinking of it from your lived experience, or if you're entrepreneur, from an entrepreneurial experience. As Black professionals, when we do that mindset shift, it can create psychological safety in the workplace, because most of us are operating from fear. You just there. You don't want to mess up. You don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to even get involved in the politics of the company, because you're like, I need to behave. Let me behave, because that's how I'm gonna get. Like, let me just be under the radar, and that's not what actually allows you to shine. I need to ask you: have you found in your career that other Black or people of color have been supportive of you in the workplace? Could you turn to other Black people for support? Because I'm like, that is also twisted.
You know what?
Yeah.
There's no unity.
That's the thing. There's no safe space within ourselves.
Unity.
How sad is that?
There's a lot of like distrust.
When it comes to romantic relationships, I don't know, that's the part that I think we need to solve for in our 20s. It's so difficult to date. And I think this also comes from the fact that being a Black woman, and if you've already got a degree, you've qualified for your boards, you've got a graduate qualification, the pool of men gets smaller and smaller.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Safe Space, a podcast where I invite people to come empower us through their storytelling, to give us the drive to continue to persevere, get on the path of healing, and, become our best selves. So today, I was thinking for episode 2, what do I focus on? Well, a recurring theme has been about navigating the 20s. We touched on it a bit in the last episode. And I felt like it's a conversation that needed to be continued. When I think back to my 20s, there were various themes, that we can explore today. One of the themes was the constant, competing interests that I had. I spoke about in the last episode how I had to sacrifice things to achieve my qualification. So there were a lot of competing interests that I had to choose amongst, and there was this constant conditioning to only do one thing, and I think that's a struggle that a lot of the youth are facing today. It was also a period where I encountered a lot of change, where I had to be brave and take, certain steps. And I feel that, having a conversation about that as well would take the discussion forward. So when I thought about a guest today, I knew exactly who I wanted to call. And it's because they actually started a newsletter on LinkedIn that's called Navigating the 20s. That guest here is Zinhle Novazi. Zinhle is an attorney, director at Heavy Chef, and identifies as a multipotentialite. We're going to delve into that a bit more. And I actually know Zinhle personally. We went to the same university. We had a lot of mutual friends. But I think what drew us closer was the fact that we're from the same province. We're both from Northwest. So even our Tswana is like the same kind of flavor of Tswana. And I remember how it was so important to have someone I could speak my home language with in a university, because, I was in a region where it was mostly English-speaking people and Xhosa people. Other than that, later on in life, I also bumped into her when she started this other organization called Women of Impact, which that she invited me to be a part of. I think just from that, our drive to do good is what drew us even closer. So when I saw you drop that article, I was like, definitely, let's unite.
Yeah. It was a continuation, basically.
Yes, it was a continuation down what's pretty much the same path.
Mm.
So since Safe Space is all about storytelling. I'm going to invite Z to like tell us about their journey. Yeah, Z.
Yeah, Tato, first of all, thank you so much for creating this platform. I think it's needed. I think there's so many people out there in the country that want to look up to people like yourselves who have, climbed the XI ladder. And as a black woman coming from, the Northwest province, we don't hear a lot about black excellence from the Northwest. It's a lot in the entertainment industry, but not so much in the corporate world. So thanks for raising that flag. As you said, I was actually born in a small village, for people that don't know, called Taung. So Kingwana Taung, Rebatlapingo Taung. And it's very weird because I'm from a Xhosa family that predominantly grew up around Tswana people. My dad was Tswana. And if I go back to my childhood, fundamentally, when I look back, there are maybe 3 distinguishing factors. The first one is I literally grew up around the country. So I was born in the Northwest in Taung, spent some time with my grandparents, and then from there, my mom, for better job opportunities, would travel to different countries or change corporations for a better standard of living. So we often traveled. We went from Kimberley, went to Johannesburg, Cape Town, and basically it was starting all over again, developing relationships with different people. And throughout that journey, another second recurring theme is that growing up, I wasn't actually, let me say, growing up in a homogenous society. Like I said, my grandmother is Zulu. She married a Xhosa man. And my dad is Tswana. My mom obviously grew up Xhosa, and we grew up in the Northwest, where it was predominantly Tswana people. My nannies were mainly from Lesotho, or if I say the ladies that would help us out at home. So I had that influx. I had many recurring themes. And even growing up, I always found that I couldn't fit a certain mold. So like, if I look in terms of languages, I speak a combination of languages. I can't speak one language only. If I look at accents, it's the same thing. And so when people used to ask me questions like, where's home? I find that difficult to answer, because home is where my people are. And I think all those themes came together into forming me into becoming what is a multipotentialite. And I think to a certain degree, all black people have that discrepancy where you don't really have a place where it's home. And I'm sure you could also relate, like who you are when you're in the Northwest, versus Tato, the person that you are now in Johannesburg, are 2 different parallels. And so we're forced to live in that, like, just, how do I say it? In that conflicting, in that contrast, we find who we are. And from there, I guess that those were my foundational phases. I was raised by a single mom, and I think I like to emphasize this because it gives so much insight into who I am, my personality type. And even at home, I grew up from a family of matriarchs, strong black women that really run their own household. So I think that ingrained independence and strength and understanding that, like, no man is coming to save you. Like, you need to get out there and do what you want. And I think that's even like a theme that most black women grow up with. I'm not sure in your experience with your household, whether you were taught to like fiercely go out for what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I also grew up with a single parent. And yeah, I think even besides having a conversation about it, you're kind of forced to, because you kind of have to pick up the slack and fill in the gaps where, that you would have gotten if you were coming from a household that was probably where you had both parents. So even though there wasn't like a matriarchal force, I think the matriarchy existed by virtue of the fact that my mom was the only parent.
100%. Yeah, and I think that gives us a foundation. Obviously, there is also trauma in being raised by a single parent, but I often look back with so much appreciation when I compare myself with friends that came from 2 household where there was 2 parents, that I think that even pushed me further. When I look at how much sacrifices my mom had to make to get to where I am, like, one thing is she never compromised on my education. So as much as I've basically attended 5 different primary schools across 7 different cities, across 5 different provinces, went to 2 different high schools, 3 universities. And the constant theme was that if my mom changed jobs or moved to another province, the first question she'd ask, where's the best school in there? And it was previously when we had that whole system where you had to live in the feeder area to go to the school. So my mom would find a job in whatever area it was, and then she'd do research around where the best schools are, and she'd ensure that we lived in the neighborhood so that I could go to that school. So like now I look back and I'm like, that was so fundamental in the foundation of being who I am. And one thing that I learned from my mom, she's so, how do I say, she's so fierce in who she is that she used to teach me, like, never let people, it's coming out badly because it's translated, but never let people play in your head. Like, you need to know who you are. Don't
How
let
do you
people.
say it in Setswana?
So like I had to literally hone that in as I was growing up to always come back to myself and say, but who I am. And that is where the journey of a multipotentialite comes in, because for your whole life you are taught to go to high school, to go to university, choose your specialization. And I'll speak about my journey at university, which I think were the first sort of red flags I was getting that I'm a multipotentialite. So I was in law school. Well, I did the BSOC Sci LLB stream. And in my first year of law, I got there and I was like, I'm focused. I got the Ellen Gray scholarship, so I needed to be on Dean's Merit list. I did that for a year and I lost the scholarship at the end of at the end of my second year because the focus had changed. I found myself being on campus and being like, hey, actually, I want to chill with the engineers. Let me go figure out what they're learning. I wanted to learn a little bit about accounting. I was very attracted to the Biz Sci program. And it sounded confusing at the time because everyone was like, but you're a law student, like, why are you attending the other classes? But it was my fascination and my curiosity that drew me. And that's then what happened in second year. The result of chilling with engineers and some of the biz sci students was that then I was trying to start a business with my then business partners, which was Ndaba, Gregory, Ndaba and Gregory, who am I forgetting? And Andre. So we tried to start. So instead of being in class, we were out there pitching. We were working on business proposals. And I was enjoying it. And I was like, okay, but I'm supposed to be a lawyer. Like, so then you feel this sense of guilt. Like, you're here for a specific purpose. Come back to the focal point. And honestly, it was only when the business failed, when we couldn't make money out of the business we were trying to propose, that I was like, okay, I need to go back to reality. At the end of my experience, I need to become a lawyer. And I don't know what your journey was like at UCT, because I know AXA is a very strict program, but I feel like we don't create room for people to venture out. We're like, you're studying to be a lawyer, start thinking like a lawyer, start narrowing your interests to being like a lawyer, when we should allow people to pursue other interests. Because I don't know, how did you end up going into AXA? Like, was it like...
Preach. You are preaching to the choir, because I faced a major challenge with that. Obviously, the XI degree, as you were saying, was very challenging. Also started out first year, second year, doing well. But I think when I got to third year and I started like going on the journey of being a transgender woman, that's where the being like monolithic, became a challenge. Yeah. Because after I found that out, I developed a sense of like wanting social justice. So I found myself now wanting to run for the SRC. I mean, in my third year. Yeah. No pride, because everybody who was running for the SRC, they climbed through the ladder, they started house com,
exactly.
They did all of that. But now I was campaigning. I had to stand in front of people and do something that I've never done before. Who got in, and then that was the birth of my student political career. Exactly. At some point also wanted to, obviously started the Trans Collective. Then there was also me wanting to do the gender and transformation honors.
Exactly.
Because I was really struggling to like position actuarial science within the broader need of wanting to do good. And it's something that took a few years, like only like last year could I really position it in the form of like it being a social good that needs to be, that needs to also infiltrate, that needs to, how do I put this? That needs to also infiltrate the Black population, right? Because
Exactly.
everybody is underinsured.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the journey that I had. So from there, I couldn't just be like an XI grad person. I had to
Exactly.
also be a social justice activist.
Exactly, because you're multidimensional, right? And I think at the core of who you are, you want change for other people. You don't want people to walk the path that you did. You're hoping that by using your voice and standing for something, especially within the trans community, that you inspire other people, you share the knowledge so that somebody else's journey doesn't have to be as tough as you are. And I think at a SRC level, that was so important that UCT was going through so many transformational, whether it was fees must fall, roads must fall, that it needed to be a transformation that was also representative on all grounds. So I think that's where it fundamentally starts. And it's sad that if you've got a social activist within you, you go to corporate and it's like, you must shut that thing off because now we're here to make money and it's capitalism. What is socialism doing within corporate? But that's actually what makes you thrive as a human being. We all inherently want to do good. We want to change society. And I think for me, when I started my first job, that was where like I was having that conflict where I'm like, there's a part of me that feels like, ah man, things are not in alignment, something's missing. But to walk you through like my starting point, like my first job was actually in consulting. I was working for SRM, and to this day I think they're one of the best companies ever in terms of a company culture perspective. And the reason why is when I started in the consulting space with them, I made it clear to the manager that like this was a means to a way, in a sense that I wanted to pursue my articles and eventually become an attorney. So when I started that job, I was going for interviews, and my director was so supportive of that. She'd say, hey, should we book a boardroom for you? I'd be like, hey, I need to take leave because I'm going for an interview. So it was like extreme transparency. And because of that, I could perform at all levels. And then it's like in my psyche, I was like, okay, this is how corporate's going to be. Like everyone's supportive and you're going to be allowed to thrive. And then I started articles, and boy, oh boy, was I surprised. I mean, there are many undertones, but what I think I fundamentally struggled with going into a law firm is that we sold this idea that you can fully be yourself when you're in corporate, right? But it's not true. There's almost like there's a script. There's a way that you must be. And in interviews, I talk about like, who are you? You want to get to know who you are and who you authentically are. And I would speak about who I am. I get the job and I get to work. And then I realize, okay, actually, there's a conflict here. People don't really allow you to be your full self. They don't want me to express the entrepreneurial Zinhle. They don't want me to express the questioning Zinhle. They want Zinhle to be a lawyer who only thinks, lives, and breathes law. And for me, that was suffocating, because what energizes me, what allows me to bring my full self to work, is if you allow all of those to play in. I used to get questions. Actually, my heavy shift journey started while I was doing articles, and I would get asked questions like, do you want to be a presenter or do you want to be a lawyer? You've got to pick. And the other thing that I fundamentally do is sports. Like wellness and sports is a huge part of who I am, because it's how I manage mental health. It's how I have fun. And it's how I allow for continuity. And it would be like the same if I would say, I need to knock off at 5 because I need to go for a run before it gets dark. And then people would be like, you need to choose. Are you a lawyer or are you a runner? And I think there's so many multipotentialites within corporate that can't display the array or the fullness of who they are. So like, I know, like, I mean, I've had issues with bringing my full self to work as a Black female, but I think the hardest hurdle has been bringing myself to work as a multipotentialite and truly being accepted. I think corporate hasn't expanded enough to allow multipotentialites to flourish in the workplace. I don't know in XI whether it's the same. Like, I think you get there. Is there room?
Yeah.
Is there room?
We talked about this a lot in episode 1, but
yeah,
you know, when I finished, so for me to actually make it through varsity,
yeah,
I had to put aside the social justice activism.
Yeah.
Right? Because every time I failed, it was always blamed on like the lack of focus, which introduces a lot of shame and guilt, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, I think the only commitment I kept was like the trans collective in order to support the current members, because some of us were leaving university.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the theme was focus, focus, focus. When you get to when you start working, focus, work
Yeah.
and studying, like you're studying 400 hours every 6 months. And, you're pretty much obsessed with qualifying. And that's what the culture is like.
Yeah.
And, similar to you, I became very unhappy without like taking care of the other aspects of myself, right? Because in varsity, it was clear that I'm a passionate person, that I want to do good.
Exactly.
But it was when I focused on getting this qualification, that part of me kind of like, as soon as I finished, it came to reckon with me.
Sure.
Because the wheels came off,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
For 5 to 6 years.
Yeah. You
this
put
person
everything on hold. Hey.
And now the chicken was coming home to roost.
Hey.
And it led to, pretty much a what you would call a quintessential crisis.
Exactly.
Right? Which emanated from this, tendency and this commitment for me to actually be monolithic throughout my 20s. Just before I exited the 20s, then that's when luckily I was able to finish with the core exams, and now I had the time to think about it.
Yeah.
But I wonder,
Yeah.
what if I had to continue writing the exams? What would have eventually happened if, the crisis was so intense?
Yeah.
Because I was out for 5-6 years.
Exactly. I think it definitely builds up to the point where one day, and I hope people don't get to this point, like you paralyzed and you no longer can give anything of yourself, because for so long you've withheld, and there's also a certain resentment that you then have for the company that you work for or for the profession that you're in, that you find a complete disconnect and you don't want to do the work that you're in, because if I go through what I went through in terms of my quintessential crisis, the initial first one, I also got given that advice, if you could just focus on law. So I was like, okay, let me give it a try for a month. I gave up the running, which first of all, biggest mistake, because the intensity at which law firms operate, you need an outlet. So when I started to give up that which gave me happiness and allowed my mental well-being to flourish, I was already starting every day miserable and cranky and just feeling unorganized. And then the second thing, I was like, okay, I'm going to hold back on the emceeing, hold back on the, my commitments to Heavy Chef. And what I found is I was underperforming. I would sit at work just unable to concentrate. And it's because somebody's actually telling you to shut off yourself. If I can give an example, it's like telling a mother not to talk about being a mother at work, or not to forget about your motherly duties. And we don't say that about parenting. It's weird. We allow people to be multipotentialites in certain aspects. So if I say I'm a wife and I'm a mother, and I don't know, I help my cousin with philanthropic related things to kids. Let's say those are my 3 roles, and then I'm at work. No one's going to tell me, hey, don't come here and speak about being a mother. Or actually, Zinhle, you're not focusing at work because you are being a mother at home, you being a husband, you being a mother, you being a wife to somebody else. So all those roles are over consuming. So at its core, I really believe everyone's a multipotentialite, but corporate has a way that it's structured. So I think when how you show up threatens the framework of corporate, that's when corporate doesn't allow you to flourish. That for me was hard. I literally started underperforming. I felt miserable. It felt like I was going through a depression. I just couldn't do the work anymore because it felt like I had left 40% or 60% of me somewhere else. And then when I kicked back into mode, then I could see it. And people do say, you're spreading yourself too thin, and that's why, or you can't do so many things, and no one will do well by focusing on so many areas. But they don't understand that's what makes it whole. And I think multipotentialites in corporate, or multi-passionate people, have the ability to change corporate's framework. They have the ability to add from an innovation perspective. And because you're coming in with so many skill sets from so many angles, when you're given a problem to solve. You're thinking of it from a social justice perspective. You're thinking from it from an analytical aspect. You're thinking of it from your lived experience, or if you're entrepreneur, from an entrepreneurial experience. So I don't see why corporate's not accepting of it when it's got the ability to add so much value. If people are entrepreneurial, let's create a space for entrepreneurs to thrive in corporate, because then they'll stay. But a lot of us leave because we just realize that we can't fit into the structure. And I think I spent so much time in my career trying to fit into the corporate structure and make it work, when the actual answer was corporate's not for you. You need to exist outside of that structure. And unfortunately, as Black people, not all of us have that privilege to make that decision to be like, I'm leaving corporate for good.
Yeah, no. That's deep. So I wanted to also like just follow up on the quintessential crisis.
Yes.
How would you characterize it? Like, if a person is in the middle of a how do you know?
Yeah. So quintessential crisis can also be referred to as a quarter life crisis. So it's most people go through it between the 20s and 30s. So if I wanted to check are you experiencing a quintessential crisis, I'd ask, like, the first sign that I witnessed was disalignment. Like, sometimes everything is going right, or it seems like it's going right, but in your core you feel like there's a disalignment between the life that you're living and everything that's happening. It feels like you're living life inauthentically. So like when I discovered this, I was back in therapy, and I was telling my psychologist, I was like, I don't feel like my authentic self. Man, something feels wrong and I can't put my finger on it. So I would be like, everything's going well at work, but I still feel inherently disconnected to myself. It's like there's a Zinhle existing somewhere in a vacuum, and there's me, and the two just are not connecting. So that's the first thing. The other thing, you start to go through this period of uncertainty. Like, you start questioning everything. Like, is this what I really like? You question everything from the relationships that I had. So even during this period, I lost a lot of friends where I was like, actually, this person is holding me for something that I'm not, or like they have an idea or conception of who I used to be, and they're not in alignment with who I am now, or the person that I'm thriving to be. So you're questioning relationships, you're questioning your whole career. Like, you're like, why did I become a lawyer to begin with? Like, and sometimes some of the decisions we make in life are pushed by survival. That, you come from a Black family, you want to be the first of many firsts, and now that you've created your whole reputation around being a lawyer, how do you escape from that? So I went through that, and it's a lot of introspection. Like, you're sitting, you're questioning, and what helped me when I was going through the quintessential crisis, I had, like, I would say, a tribe of mentors. They're not officially mentors, but people who I trust. So I'd say, listen, this is in disalignment. I don't understand what's going there. And it was clear that for me, my quintessential crisis was saying I needed like a whole new career. Like, being in a corporate structure wasn't for me. That perhaps all my life I've been entrepreneurial, and I hadn't really explored that path. And maybe it might have been that I was gunning more for security, but there was so much of me that needed to be expressed, and I just found that where I was wouldn't allow for me to fully express all the interests and all the things that were keeping me curious. Have you, do you think, judging by some of the things that I went through, have you gone through a quintessential crisis? And like, do you have any like red flags that were pointing like, hey, actually things are in disalignment?
Yeah, no, like the thing is, everything that you're saying, like, I can relate with, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
Firstly, when I was going through the quarter life crisis, I think it happened over a period of 6 months. And, it was right after I finished the exam, got my result, and I was like, okay, like, I don't have to study anymore. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
So it started off with adopting toxic habits, filling it with like toxic habits. So I was like, no, this is not me. Like, because every time, like, I didn't have to build that discipline, right? Because I prioritized my study. So everything, it was easy to like deprioritize toxic habits. But then it's like after that, I was like, okay, now I have to deal with life. Until it got to a point where actually I had a panic attack.
Sure.
where it was like, it was so intense. So what happened when the panic attack came? I had to sit down, like you're saying. And then I don't know what set it in me, but I was like, I need to figure out myself. Sat down with my A5. Literally just saying, what do I like? And then that's when I realized, okay, my corporate ambitions are not going to be enough. I know I want to do good. That's how Tsogang came about.
Yes.
And I also I thought about a lot. I thought about my 10-year plan, how to, what am I going to do like, in 10 years? What organizations do I want to have? And a lot of it, I think my ability to process things like that came from therapy as well. I was in therapy for like 4 or 5 years, just trying to like adopt like healthy coping mechanisms, ways to like, be able to stand back and say like, but objectively speaking, like, what is it that I want? So I was able to process that. The other thing which I maybe wanted your opinion on is, as I'm describing my journey, like studying Tsogang, there's this fear, and this insecurity that you feel when you have to like, because after a crisis, there always comes radical change, right?
Exactly.
Like for me, like I started building from scratch, asking myself, very fundamental questions. One other thing I learned in my 20s is whenever there's a gut feeling fear that I feel. Like, and I've grown to understand that fear. Like to actually tell me I need to do it.
That's the only way. It's not, don't escape it. I think that fear is a guiding
and
compass.
It's not like a fear of like, okay, I fear getting robbed. It's like that fear that I feel like it comes from the same place as shame.
Yes.
To be quite honest.
Yes.
Because it can literally, I don't know how many times I delayed starting Tsogang, like to the point where, I had to disobey the brain and be like, I'm posting this thing, I'm starting this journey so that drive to go against that pretty much worked for me in my 20s. I was able to, put myself up for opportunities and, so all of that, it made it easy when I came to this point where I now had to decide on what am I doing next? What defines me?
So, I mean, I also relate to a lot of aspects in your journey. That gut feeling that you're talking about, I think there were many points. Like, so when I initially started my journey with Heavy Chef, there was so much tension at work about it. And it would be like, it's a conflict of interest or whatever. And I was still a young profession, but at my gut, at my core, I knew that this is inherently tied with something I have to do. So I fought for it. And I think the shame also comes from knowing that you're going against the grain. And it's like, sometimes it's like when you are starting something new. So like when I was also starting navigating the 20s, I was like, but what makes you different? Like, why do you think it will succeed? Because you're starting it. So it's that doubt. But it's like inherently that calling keeps calling and it keeps nudging until you can't ignore it anymore, where you're like, okay, I'm just going to do this. And if it fails, then it fails. So like it's that perplexity of the mixed emotions when you're going for it. But I think whenever I've followed that gut feeling where I know, and it was like this the same, like I remember I had to resign from a job because it was inherently, like when I looked at my long-term goal, I was like, it's no longer connected to who I want to be and what I want to do. And that gut feeling kept affirming it. And the other thing I want to talk about, because you mentioned that you had to really sit with yourself and therapy gave you that mechanism. What I find what's wrong with what we're doing as young professionals, we're letting life go quick and we don't make time to introspect. And I was like guilty of this. Like my schedule's always jam-packed. If I'm not running the races, it's work, it's being, I don't know, emceeing at Heavy Chef, doing this. The plate is always full. And it's only when I'm sick, like, and my body does that, it will just go sick and I'm forced to shut down and I can't even do anything. I can't run, I can't do anything. Then I'm stuck and then I have to sit and be like, Zinhle, when last were you sitting down with your thoughts? Let's check in with ourselves. Are we in alignment with where we want to be? What is making me unhappy? What changes should I be making? So I had swine flu for like 10 days and I had to sit and introspect and be like, Zinhle, we're unhappy about a lot of things. And I think that's where navigating the 20s was birthed from when I sat there and I was like, my whole experience of corporate has been unpleasant, and I'm glad it was, because I learned so much. And I then sat down and said, how many other people my age are going through the same thing? And that's where Women of Impact started from, because I was like, I'm struggling doing articles. There's so much that I have to face as a Black woman. I want a group of other Black women in different industries that I can see validate their some of their struggles within corporate, and create that space where we can support each other. And so navigating the 20s is now like a written form of that, but expanded towards the youth, because I was like, the 20s, no one gives us a memo of how it should be. And I honestly think there is a guidance. Like, if somebody validates the idea that you're going to have so many conflicts with your career, and specifically with Black young professionals, that don't think that you conformed or you have to stick to one career your whole life. As a multipotentialite, I've made peace with the fact that I'm going to have different careers and different phases of my life, and that's okay. Like, maybe one day I'm not even going to use being an attorney as part of my brand, because it no longer aligns with the work that I do. So like, and that even takes like work, shedding off the brand that you created. Like, I branded myself as an attorney for a long time, and then I was like, okay, attorney is no longer relevant to my path. Now I'm starting a new identity as somebody who's entrepreneurially curious. So letting go of that, and also getting the validation from your family that it's okay. So like, I remember having this conversation with my mom where I was like, I don't think I want to be a lawyer anymore. And I was scared, but she was like, I can see why not. And that's where you need validation from your community and the people that often we think we're doing this employment or this corporate life for. When they give you that validation, then you're free to do whatever it is that you want to do.
I can relate with that, because validation for me is it has so much power, and I think that's where things like representation and the likes come from, because some forms of validation might not be like overt.
Yeah.
It might be like seeing someone that you like, especially for Black professionals. I feel that, without the need to without the representation aspect being sorted out, it takes away many opportunities to feel like validated. And I always say that it introduces this extra burden of having to have like a very extraordinary imagination,
Exactly.
So I do feel like, when going through that process of change, one must actually think about the support structures that are available.
100%.
Because you're not going to be able to do it alone. We just talked about therapy.
Yeah.
You talked about family.
Yeah.
And what else? Like, are there other things that,
Yeah.
other tools that the youth could use?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to see a business coach, and it's so unfortunate that they're so expensive. But what I found is therapy could give me mechanisms on how to control feelings, how to introspect, but it couldn't give me a plan to be like, this is what I want to do for my life, so these are the steps that I needed to do. So I went and saw a business coach who was like, let's talk about your brand. Like, why are you neglecting your brand? These are the other opportunities that are in the line. Because I would get opportunities, speaking engagements that kept popping up. And eventually she was like, you've got a spectrum of opportunities. Why aren't you capitalizing on that? And at the same time, they were there as an accountability partner. So I would say mentors are important. And again, when I speak about mentors, it has to be a diverse set of people. So I was lucky, like some of my mentors are entrepreneurs, some of them are founders, CEOs, people that are running their business. That offers an array of perspective. Sometimes you go to your friends hoping that they'll give you advice. But like, for instance, with me, specifically when I was wanting to make the jump out of corporate, to go to my friends who are in corporate, it can be triggering for them. So most of the advice would be more like, no man, just stay, make it work, or like move to another company, like what. And those are not necessarily the kind of advice that you might need. And that's why you need like a diverse spectrum of, and even family. Sometimes family is not conducive for giving you advice of what to do next, because there's trauma and often I think our parents want to know that we've got security and we're safe, and security is often financial security above emotional security. And am I able to show up authentically me? So that kind of also helped that I had advice from diverse people together with seeing a psychologist and having access to a business executive coach. So my hope literally with navigating the 20s is also to democratize resources like that, because I know not everyone can afford to go to therapy and not everyone can afford to see a business coach. So I hope like 10 years from now I can have a platform where young people can go and get this kind of advice directly from business coaches and psychologists.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Because I've also done like throughout that whole journey with therapy, I've had tons of coaches as well. Because I think coaching, while therapy is inward looking, coaching is more like how you present yourself, right?
Exactly.
In a corporate world.
Yeah.
And I feel that coaching might be useful for us as young black professionals because, like you said, the issue of security,
Yeah.
can cloud one's judgment.
Yeah.
In the sense that you could feel trapped.
Exactly.
You could be in a situation, whether you're the first time graduate, so there's black tax to be paid. You
100%.
can't just, leave your job. And then, but it also does certain things that, coaching and therapy can help with. And it could be things like, perfectionism at work.
Exactly.
Or, wanting to be 100% correct,
Yeah.
and not caught out.
Yeah.
Wanting to, and like not allowing room for mistakes.
That's true.
And what needs to be discussed is that really an imaginary thing that, or is it actually an expectation that, okay,
Yeah.
since we've brought you in and we chose you as like the young black professional,
Yeah.
you're expected to fit a certain mold,
Yeah.
But even fighting such structures, you would need coaching.
Exactly. And I think a lot of it with young black professionals, we deal with imposter syndrome. And I'm glad you mentioned that perfectionism sort of mindset that most of us go into work with. Because the thing is, and I think I sort of unlocked this during my entrepreneurship journey. Oh, no. During my articles journey, where it's like you go into corporate, and I don't know if it's like this across the board or it's just particularly with black professionals, but you are made to feel like you should be grateful that you're there. And that kind of also enforces the psyche where if things are going wrong or you're in a toxic environment, you feel like you can't stand up for it because you should be grateful that you're there. And you feel like you can't afford to make a mistake because how lucky am I to be there? And I don't know what happened, or it could have also been experiences. I had a shift in mindset where I'm like, they should be grateful to have me as a resource. And when I started operating from that, I wasn't operating from fear, because I entered, let me say, my articles journey operating from fear, being like, what a great opportunity it is to be here, that I would tolerate so many things that should have not been tolerated at that level. That when that mindset shift then played in, then I said, well, actually, I'm highly qualified. I worked really hard to get here. So actually, this corporate institution or this company should also be grateful to have a resource like me. And when you go into the world like that, people see the value that you bring, that it expands beyond that. So I think as black professionals, when we do that mindset shift, it can create psychological safety in the workplace, because most of us are operating from fear. You just there. You don't want to mess up. You don't want to make a mistake. You don't want to even get involved in the politics of the company because you're like, I need to behave. Let me behave because that's how I'm going to get, like, let me just be under the radar. And that's not what actually allows you to shine, because you need to question and you need to provoke. And when you're not happy about things, and I wish that as black professionals, I mean, I've worked for so many companies where I know people are unhappy about the work culture, but they're not going to stand up and they're not going to unite together and say, let's stand up for it, because everyone's just like, I'm not willing to mess up my career, or bonus talks are coming up, I'm not going to mess that up. So security will always trump that. And it's sad that security to this day trumps psychological safety in the workplace.
Because I have seen that there's a trend, going around with the corporates after COVID, the whole mental health wave, I've heard the word psychological safety so many times.
Yeah.
But do you think that's real? Do you think also like touching on the notion of work-life balance,
Yes. Yes. So when you, I think psychological safety can exist, but it's something that like corporates have to be deliberate in working towards, and it has to be shaped by the employees themselves. And then when it comes to work-life balance, I'd like to think it exists, but it's not work-life balance. It's an integration, right? And this also largely depends on the institution that you work for, because they've got to understand it's not like you at work and life must now wait, or you doing life and work. Most of the time they flow into each other. And I think there can be peaks and troughs. Actually, good advice that I once got from somebody. They said at any point in time in your life, you can only balance 3 things at the same time and do it relatively well. So on my plate, at any point in time, there's often 5 or 6 things on the table, but I'll only balance 3. So if I'm having a family crisis, work might have to come down. Maybe that week I'm not actually performing at 110. Maybe I'm bringing it down to 40% because my 100% is focused on the crisis that's happening at work. Then the third ball in the table could be the fact that because there's a work crisis, I'm needing to do more introspection. I need more time for self-development to deal with the crisis that's on the table. And then for me, it's always exercise. So work would fall down, then it just means it's family at that point, my self-development and exercise to cope. And then maybe at another point, there's an interesting project that I'm on at work. It means I'm giving it 110%. Family members are calling me like, Mang is having a birthday this week. I can't show up. So then the family obligations is brought down. So like, I think you need to see work-life balance as an ebb and a flow. But there are also fundamental discrepancies. I find that single women with no children are probably going to suffer the most because
interesting
in the workplace, think about it. If something happens at lunch break, right, and one of your colleagues is married with children, and she says, "Oh no, I need to take off for 2 hours. My child fell off a tree or whatever." Everyone understands, and no one's going to stand in the way of that. And the way that our labor laws have been drafted, it's in support of that family life. She can even take family responsibility leave. If I look at myself as a single individual, who's my support system? It's my friends and my family. So if one of my friends is hospitalized, I can't apply for family responsibility leave, even though they are my supportive system. It's going to come from my annual leave, right? And can I leave early to go see if a friend is okay in hospital? And I think we need to challenge this system, because it then means the people who are neglected within the system are your young professionals who are unmarried, with no children. And I think there is slightly more support for single mothers, but they also kind of have their own challenges. But for me as a young working professional, I mean, I experienced something earlier beginning of this year, where a friend's landlord called me and told me a friend was suicidal. And now I sat at work and I was like, I had this guilt. I'm like, well, what am I going to say? It's not my husband. It's not my child. So I'm going to call and say I need to leave work because my friend is suicidal. And the fact that I was having that dilemma, I mean, I eventually left work to go check on the friend. But the fact that I was having that dilemma in my mind tells you that corporate is not geared to understand single people's lives and to say, but who's within their framework? And I think it's also our labor laws. Why is family responsibility leave confined to immediate family when if you're a single person who lives, I mean, our parents live in different provinces. So our immediate network is our friends. Those are the people that are going to show up when we're sick, when we're in hospital. They're going to be the first point of call. So I think we need to relook at that structure to say, how can we make the system more supportive? Because at the end of the day, it affects people like you and me until we get married or have children. But why should we wait till then?
I mean, that is so true. I even have heard that, even when it comes to salaries, it's a thing of, John has 2 kids and, he needs to pay for school fees.
Imagine that.
When you're single, you're young, you're a woman, so probably somebody's supporting you.
Exactly. You don't have as many financial burdens.
You don't have as many financial burdens.
Yeah.
But I think that going forward, there is a need for us to band together as young Black professionals, right? Thinking of how we're the majority of the population.
Yeah.
we are the future of these organizations. I mean,
100%.
the first step is for us to transform our own selves and our own thinking, right? Because we're gonna be the CEOs, we're gonna be the chairman of boards and such and such.
When you say that, I need to ask you, have you found in your career that other Black or people of color have been supportive of you in the workplace? Could you turn to other Black people for support? 'Cause I'm like, that is also twisted.
You know what?
Yeah.
There's no unity.
That's the thing. There's no safe space within
no
ourselves. How sad is that?
There's a lot of like distrust. And I think the saddest thing for me is the fact that, you know, like having a Black woman manager, like, was the worst management experience I had.
Imagine that.
Honestly, and it's like there's this tendency of, you know, the pull, I think they call it the pull her down syndrome.
Yes.
Or like to be thinking like as a black woman, you'll be thinking, there's only one seat at the top, you know. And I could understand why you would then feel threatened by, you know, a young, you know, Zinhle or Tato coming through.
Exactly.
All this energy, you know.
Exactly.
You might be scared, my EE seat is gonna be taken.
Yeah.
You also see it through salaries, you know. We don't share like.
No, you don't want to know. And you know what we're doing? We're creating the own ceiling because I don't know how much you're earning. I don't know how much to negotiate. I don't know where the bar is. So I think some of the mechanisms, and I think it's from our own trauma as people of color and all of that. I wish that system would change, because if there was trust, like my whole career, or let me say, the two worst people that I found are Black women and Black men. Those are people that would snitch, and you would say things in confidence, and then you would hear it in other rooms, or things would get manipulated. And even when I look at my career in terms of who are the mentors that showed up, I am shook to this day to say it's been mainly white Afrikaner men. How crazy it is in South Africa that the people who are advocating and often supporting for me are it's white Afrikaner men. I mean, I think in the early stages, my first job, the other like worst experience I had, I was managed by a white Afrikaans woman. That was also, I think, women in the workplace in general, there's no support, there's still that competitiveness, and you would hope that you would get a woman who would see you and be like, I went through this nonsense, let me make sure that the experience is completely different. So I really think, and that's why when I started Women of Impact, I was like, we need to change this. Like, if I can't get men on board, let me just at least start with women of color in all the different professions. And imagine what dominance we would have if we actually supported each other. And I think it's also like grappling with internal stuff. I mean, I have had to admit and say, okay, I do get jealous of people, but analyze that jealousy. If you're jealous of someone, to be like, okay, why am I jealous of this person? And often it's like, okay, if I say I'm jealous of Tato because she's got her own podcast, then it'd be like, oh, actually, that jealousy is telling me I want to do a podcast. It's actually got nothing to do with Tato's character or who she is as a person. So I shouldn't be hating her. Her lifestyle is reflecting to me what am I missing in my life. And I think when you look at jealousy that way, you don't go and become strange or gossip about people, make up stuff about people to put them down. Instead, you use it as an indicator to be like, okay, my psyche is telling me this is what I want. When I look at Tato behind the mic, I'm like, yo, I also want that. But because we don't understand how to engage with our emotions, then I think, oh, I must hate Tato because she's got a podcast. She thinks she's better than me. She thinks she's better than all of us. And if we can just trap away that mentality, we would be far more progressive internally and as a society together.
Yeah, hey, I think it's, you know, the first step then is like, you know, for the youth to understand that we need to build unity then. And we need to also look inside us, because I know through my transformation journey, therapy and coaches, one of the other things it did was make me a better person. So when I look around, I think my friendships and my connections with people benefited the most. So I definitely relate with that, in the sense that that, you know, coming back from that background and, you know, wanting to band together as Black people, as the Black youth, is the key to like our success.
100%. And if I can ask, do you find that, or let me say, if I take you back to your Exide days, the biggest thing that you grappled with outside of work is relationships? How many relationships have you lost along the pathway? How many relationships could you not maintain because you were like in that, like, I need to get ready for boards and everything? And even like now with like dating and wanting to have like more secured relationships, do you feel like in your 20s relationships have also equally been the hardest to navigate?
You mean romantic relationship,
Romantic and
or
platonic.
friendship and platonic? It's been very difficult to maintain. I mean, the worst example we can give is, you know, when I realized like I was in the AWC, the Actual Women's Committee, and I learned for the first time that, you know, like even mothers struggle. You know, mothers struggle to qualify because somehow they have to also disconnect from their babies.
Yeah.
So that would be like the worst examples, like not being able to maintain friendships because you need to disappear for 6 weeks. And you know, you can't build any kind of friendship on that. You can't sustain any kind of romantic relationship.
Yeah.
But what it does is at the end, you become underdeveloped in those areas.
That's true. That's true.
So either way, I think it's something that you would have to reckon with. What has been your experience?
I think it's also hard. I think it's also because like I'm learning more about myself, and like I guess I'm on a journey of becoming who I want to be. And I've gone through so many sheddings where I've lost friends who I felt like they weren't developing at the level I needed to be supported. Or sometimes you find like you can't support other people because you're on drive mode. And the people that have stuck around is people that have understood that journey. They've understood like this is who fundamentally Zinhle is. And because I move around a lot, I think starting relationships for me is easy, maintaining them is not. And when you find people that understand who you are at your core, they're willing to ride the wave with you. But a lot of people would just be like, your life is too erratic, like you're up and down, you're moving, or like it doesn't feel constant, even though there are constants. But if you stick around long enough, you see those. And when it comes to romantic relationships, I don't know, that's the part that I think we need to solve for in our 20s. It's so difficult to date. And I think this also comes from the fact that being a Black woman, and if you've already got a degree, you've qualified for your boards, you've got a graduate qualification, the pool of men gets smaller and smaller. And obviously then we want things. You want a woke guy. You want a man who's very intuitive, who understands. You want somebody who also values health and has got a good relationship with their wellness, how they're eating, they're looking after themselves, they're maintaining a good relationship. And then you get to the point where the pool is almost non-existent. So I think there's paralysis for me in that area, where I think the pool is so limited in terms of what we want, and you don't want to reduce your standards or like what your minimum criterias are for what you want in a partner.
Oh, I tried that and it didn't work.
It backfires very quickly.
And yeah, when we're also in a country where there's high unemployment and, you know, all of those factors make it like difficult to find like, you know, someone who would be compatible with you. And one thing that I learned, I used to deprioritize friendships and romantic relationships so much because I'd be thinking, okay, it's a Friday night.
Yeah.
Let me put in a few hours of studying instead of like going on a date or going on a friendship like, you know, outing.
Yeah.
And then I realized over time what had to click is it's not either or.
It has to
You
be both.
need like, you know, all aspects of life.
Exactly.
And it like takes it back to the dimensions of being a multipotentialite as well. You know, you need to make time for relationships because that's like the human condition.
100%.
So Z, just thank you for the conversation. What message would you have for, you know, somebody who's a multipotentialite? So what words would you say to them right now to affirm them?
So if you are a multi-potentialite, first of all, I'm going to say to you, it's going to be a hard journey, but don't give up. Know at your core what stimulates you, what you love, what your key interests are, because that's what you're going to need to be coming into to affirm the decisions that you make. With most multi-potentialites, if you're going to take the corporate route, make sure that you sass out that company's culture, that it allows room for you to be a diverse person and that you don't feel boxed in. But I think most multi-potentialites are most likely going to exist outside of corporates, whether it's as a consultant, as a freelancer, as an entrepreneur. And so explore those. And I think if you ever feel guilt into thinking, what's wrong with me? Like, why aren't I conforming to the idea that you need one career for one lifetime? Know that it's absolutely normal. And I think find other multi-potentialites within your networks, because they will affirm like what you're going through. And at the end of the day, I think you need to stay true to who you are. Understand what lights up your fire, because that will always guide you. I think it's a hard journey. You're going to have to be brave. And ultimately, I think that multi-potentialites have the ability to change the world, institutions, the way we do business, and just life in general. So stay true to who you are and don't change.
Easy. I feel like you're going to be back because we haven't even touched on the tech stuff.
We've got so much to talk about.
Like Z is going to come back, y'all. And just to add to what Z said, we also talked about like mental health, right? What it means, like the quintessential crisis, and about embracing change, daring greatly, you know. So I'm pretty happy with the outcome of this episode. Thank you for joining Safe Space. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the notification button so that you receive notifications when we upload videos. See you next time.